All right, hell yeah. So we got this thing fleshed out, and we have 2 layers of 2-inch foam. And so that's 4 inches thick, and booyah. And it's pretty rigid. And all we did was just kind of jammed those pieces of foam in their spots. And so now, and since everything's square, I can literally walk on the squares and then kind of hop to the new locations. But that's the whole point, is that we can shift the boat onto, these different surfaces. And so I should be cautious about the bow. But anyway, and I'm just going to take a pause on like removing all of these, maybe individually and then jamming them back in with glue. Because I think that could be pretty useful, especially saturating the joints, because it's just cardboard, and even if I did glue them in place, it could still just rip apart on those joints. But I think if I'm going this far, a layer of fiberglass over it would do the trick. But I'm just continuing on just because from a build perspective out of cardboard, I do like these sticking up. And this is the 18-inch height, so that's 18 inches there. And when this is flush, that's 18 inches there. So like this one, and it feels about right. Probably can't see, but hell yeah. So if I'm sitting in here, you know what I mean? Here's the cockpit. Here's where I'm going to be sitting. And so, booyah. All right, hell yeah. And the other part of this boat, you know what I mean, even before it sees water, is to get the cockpit fleshed out how I want it. You know what I mean? So I want to do a thwart-less cockpit. You know what I mean? So no inflatable tubes, and it's just a seamless cockpit. So the cockpit it's more going to be like a paddle cat has a cockpit, but this will still have the benefits of a round boat cockpit where you have places to put your feet under, but they can't go any farther. And we're going to do that on the sides as well. And so that's kind of the cool thing about this, is we went out to 30 inches where, you know what I mean? It simulates, I'll be able to simulate pushing my foot into the corners, which are usually like the worst place because they're so low. But mine is going to be a nice flush into the corner, and then it's going to have foam over the top, just a little bit of foam, so you can push your foot all the way into that corner and then lift up. So essentially, everywhere that you have the floor with the cockpit, you're going to have a little lip. So then anywhere my foot is, it can lift up and brace. And so, all right, hell yeah. So I think before I do anything more structural, I just thought this was, like, after I put a few pieces in, and I was just thinking about putting 1 or 2 pieces in just so I could actually flesh out the cockpit. But then it went so well, and now I'm just like, ready for fiberglass, and maybe even some poor man's fiberglass, and who cares? But at this point, yeah, maybe. So I've been learning that even though it's expensive, the expensive epoxy is less volatile. I mean, it's just less cancerous. Like I worked with Bondo resin, and man, that stuff, it melts vinyl, and so that's kind of what it's for. For like, that's kind of one of the properties for like heavy mesh, rough. Anyway, whatever it's called for that. But anyway, if you use straight up epoxy and then cloth, then your odors are actually substantially less than that Bondo. But I will never do that Bondo again. And I was almost surprised. This is just a side note. There's always those few people that are killing it making fiberglass or like resin epoxy tables, and I just thought they were just breathing the same chemicals I was breathing when I was working with that Bondo resin, and nah, so it's probably a little bit better. It's all bad, but yeah, I remember that. Even in the ski shop, we'd work with epoxy. It's all right. But yeah. Okay, hell yeah. So I'm excited about this. I might flip the boat over and maybe get a weight. I don't know. It doesn't weigh too much so far. And yeah, we got some nice cardboard. These are bike boxes, and that was like the stiffest one. I was really excited about that. And so, hell yeah. So that's what the bottom looks like. And so we got more rocker, and this, because this would just simulate the inflated floor. So what we have is the most rocker in an R1 boat. That's going to be the bow. And then, yeah, and it's kind of how I want. Like this is where you're going to sit. It's kind of flush and flat. And then not too much of a taper, but that's plenty. You know what I mean? The second you lean back on that, it's actually substantial from my view. The only thing that didn't come out to my satisfaction was this joint right there. This was the one at mid-beam. And so the whole idea was to go from a flat surface and then just pass the midpoint of the boat and then get onto this new surface, and that would start to release the back of the boat. But that hinge didn't come out as good as I wanted, but that's fine because I figure I could always, get 1.5-inch foam and then taper it in, and make that as much as I want. So that's the other thing about this. I can always put foam on the bottom, especially if I'm going to epoxy and I'm not, quite satisfied with the exact shape it's taking. And so, all right, hell yeah. All right, so I think this was a pretty good day. And hell yeah. So now I'm really excited about. Yeah, and that back looks good because that back actually looks flush. And if you actually look at this, we have from here to there. So a lot of this stuff, like hopefully it was kind of like my ideas coming together and then a little bit of like, you know what I mean? I don't want to say too much woo-woo, but you kind of let, your ideas a little bit get out of the way. But you at least need some length. You know what I mean? When you're sitting in a boat, it has to have some sort of length to actually paddle, to get some tracking. Now, this is going to be wide. My whole idea was to make this surface wide and a planing surface. So then when you're sitting on this neutral surface, you're planing it across the water. And especially if all the weight is on a small flat surface, then a paddle stroke can skim your like weight and the weight of the boat through the water, which is probably more efficient than like a railed boat. Well, I mean, you either have the paddle cats, you know what I mean, which are just so much wetted area and they feel awful, or you have a round boat, which is just the whole surface, and usually that feels twice as awful. You know what I mean? There's splitting hairs between whether a round boat feels worse than a paddle cat. But you know what I mean? From today's standards, none of these boats are like specifically getting designed for R1 in mind, especially when it comes to efficiency and just R1. All the R1 boats out there are a little bit made for two people as well. And so this one should be just an R1 boat. So hell yeah. All right. Booyah.